Brother made my life hell. Then got my wife pregnant. Now he wants my help after our parents disowned him and left me their $2 million inheritance. My younger brother David had always carried a deep resentment toward me. If you think it came from jealousy, you would be mistaken. He was the favored child, not me, so there was no reason for him to envy anything. To give some context, our mother constantly indulged David. He was the golden child in our family. She cooked his meals, did his laundry, and even asked me to help him with his schoolwork. I was expected to assist him simply because we were family, yet I never received the same consideration. I accepted it because I was fairly independent. Perhaps part of the problem was that I always helped him without expecting anything in return. He never helped me when I needed it, and only came to me when he wanted something. While I was a quiet, introverted kid who enjoyed studying and keeping to myself, David was loud and aggressive, much like our father. I also tend to be straightforward and honest, never sugarcoating what I say. I believe my mother may have developed a negative view of me because of that bluntness. Her favoritism made David the family's darling, and when we were younger, I didn't mind it. However, problems began when he started bullying and mocking me for being different. He teased me about my height and the fact that I wore glasses. He would sneak into my room, read my diary, and then complain to my mother about what I had written. When I yelled at him and told our parents he was invading my privacy, they laughed it off and said it wasn't a big deal. He did worse things too, like nearly breaking my glasses and putting disgusting things in my food. Once he even put small stones in my cereal. But luckily I found them before they damaged my teeth. When I told my mother, she dismissed it and said that this was just how brothers bonded. Whenever we argued, David targeted my insecurities to insult me. Since we attended the same school, he knew I was already being bullied by a few kids. Instead of supporting me, he joined them, calling me names like ugly loser or hairy monkey and encouraging them to hurt me physically, saying I was just a big failure. Another time, during a fight about something trivial that I can't even remember now, he told me to kill myself. I could usually ignore most insults, but that one hurt deeply because I was struggling with my mental health at the time. I'm doing better now. But hearing my own brother say he wanted me dead was devastating. Our dad was often at work, and our mom didn't seem to care much. She even scolded me once, claiming it was my fault for irritating him. Things only became worse during high school. There was a shocking incident when David tried to set my hair on fire, and unbelievably our mother defended him, saying he was just playing. Who behaves like that? Thankfully, my father finally took my side and pointed out how serious the situation was. He even threatened to call the police on David. It was a real wake-up call for my brother because he had never faced consequences for his behavior before. He was genuinely shocked. My father made it clear that enough was enough, and that David needed to start respecting his older brother. Later that day, my dad came into my room to talk. I never expected him to support me because he had always told David how similar they were. Which was true. Dad admitted that he had waited for years, hoping David would mature, but he was beginning to realize that David was becoming a bully. Hearing that from my father felt incredibly validating, and I almost broke down in tears. I told him everything David had done to me over the years, including the bullying at school. My dad was shocked by how much I had endured. The next day he spoke with the principal to make sure the bullies understood there would be serious consequences if they continued. That evening he enrolled me in MMA classes at a local gym, telling me I needed to toughen up and learn how to stand up to bullies in my life. I admit that a nerdy kid like me, trying to learn to fight might have seemed ridiculous, but I took it seriously. I managed my time carefully, so I could balance my studies, daily workouts, and the MMA classes. It completely changed my life physically. One day David was up to his usual antics again. He stole my pocket money, which we earned by helping with chores. I had been saving it for quite a while. David sneaked into my room and took it, but I caught him just as he was about to ride off with his friends on his bike. I demanded that he give my money back, but he mocked me, saying the only thing I could do was run to Daddy for help. I don't know what came over me, but I punched him in the face. He was stunned and fell backward. I took my money from his pocket and shoved him down again. David started crying loudly, which was almost comical. My mother rushed outside to help him and find out what happened. When she learned that I had fought him, she looked surprised and scolded me, saying I should be a better role model for David. He seemed to enjoy watching me get scolded. My mother also complained to my dad about my behavior, saying I needed to be controlled. My dad grimly asked both of us to explain what had happened. I told him that David had stolen the money I had worked for and saved. David tried to justify it by saying he needed the money for a date, and that as his brother I should help him. Dad told David that he was lucky I had only punched him for stealing, because anyone else might have called the police. He explained that David had no right to take someone else's belongings without permission. David didn't like hearing that, and threw a tantrum, probably hoping our mother would take his side. But Dad remained firm. When David realized he wasn't going to be punished for being hit, he shouted about how much he hated me, and ran to his room, locking himself inside. After that incident, David began distancing himself from me. He finally understood that he couldn't bully me anymore, and that even Dad had stopped supporting his behavior. For the first time in a long time, I felt like we were equals, although he could no longer physically harm me. He turned to verbal insults whenever our parents weren't around. As he grew older, his behavior became worse. Each year he seemed angrier and more short-tempered. If I approached him with a question, he would ignore me and walk away, muttering insults like nerd or loser under his breath. If he needed to communicate something, he would pass the message through our mother instead of speaking to me directly. When I asked her why David couldn't just talk to me, she told me to be more understanding. I couldn't tell whether it was just puberty or genuine hatred. Over time, his comments became unbearable, and I desperately wanted to move out and get away from him. I repeatedly asked my mother to arrange a conversation so we could sit down and try to resolve our issues, but she always refused, saying she didn't want to get involved. When I asked her why she thought David treated me this way, she brushed the question aside. Eventually I left for my dream university, after earning a scholarship as a top student. My dad threw a party for me, and even my mom seemed proud. David, however, stayed distant and barely acknowledged my achievements. The day I left for university was filled with excitement for the future and relief that I was finally escaping the toxic environment at home. The first few months at university felt liberating. I made new friends, enjoyed my classes, and began building a life separate from the oppressive atmosphere of my childhood. Without David's constant verbal attacks, I felt a sense of peace I had never experienced before. During my second year, I met my wife Karen at a frat party through a mutual friend, and we connected immediately. Coming from a religious background, having children outside of marriage was frowned upon. When we discovered she was pregnant during our final year, we decided to get married soon after graduation. Our wedding was small but joyful. Our parents were happy for us, and we celebrated together. At that time, I truly believed Karen was the love of my life. I had always imagined a monogamous relationship, one woman to come home to and share my life with. Even though other women had shown interest over the years, I never pursued anything because I was genuinely happy in my marriage. Karen was my dream girl, and I never wanted to hurt her. However, I later discovered 2 instances of infidelity in our marriage. One was an on and off affair with her married coworker that lasted several years, and the other was a brief encounter with an ex-boyfriend during a visit to her family. Some people might think I was naive, and looking back I can't completely disagree. Each time we separated for a while, but I eventually chose to forgive her. I didn't want our child growing up in a broken home, and I believed we could overcome these problems. The affair with her coworker happened when we were young, and I convinced myself it was the result of youthful mistakes and poor judgment. For a time things seemed to improve. Although I could never fully trust her again, I tried to set my doubts aside. I knew that if I was going to forgive her, I had to genuinely work toward a fresh start. It has been 4 years since her second betrayal, and I felt confident about giving her another chance. Karen seemed to have changed, and we were happy while planning our family's future. But 3 months ago, my world collapsed again when she told me she had been involved in a long-term affair, and that our son might not even be mine. Her words hit me like a ton of bricks. I was overwhelmed by shock, betrayal, and disbelief. For days I struggled to process what she had said. Eventually I managed to ask why she had kept such an enormous secret, and how she could do something so devastating. Her reaction felt cold and detached, as if she were removed from the pain she had caused. Her vague answers left me with more questions than clarity. It was a surreal and painful moment, confronting the destruction of my trust and the uncertainty surrounding my own family. I continued pressing Karen for the truth, because I felt I deserved to know who the father of the child I had been raising really was. Finally she admitted that it was David. My eyes widened in shock as I asked what she meant. Karen explained that she and David had become friendly when I first introduced her to my family. She had stayed with us from Thanksgiving until New Year's Eve. David, who was usually cold toward me, had been warm and polite to her. I was actually happy about that, because I didn't want Karen to feel unwelcome. Karen wanted to be accepted by my family, so she spent a lot of time with my mother whenever possible. She noticed the tension between David and me and asked about it. I told her about our strained relationship and explained that it might never be repaired because of his unresolved feelings toward me. Karen said she understood, but she began inviting David along whenever we went out, hoping it would help us reconnect. Whenever we planned to watch a movie, she invited David and let him choose what we watched. During that time, he and I exchanged a few words, which was already an improvement compared to his usual silence. I remember Karen and David spending time together and playing video games, but I never thought anything of it. Karen told me that one day David confided in her about a difficult breakup he had recently gone through. Feeling vulnerable, he started talking to her more often. She said he would harmlessly flirt with her when I wasn't around. But eventually things went further than she expected. Just imagining my wife and brother together made me feel sick. Karen said she felt guilty afterward and ended things with him, which explained why she suddenly decided to go home instead of spending New Year's with me that year. I had tried to convince her to stay, but she insisted on leaving. When we returned to college after the holidays, she acted like her usual cheerful self, so I didn't question it. 2 weeks later we discovered she was pregnant. Karen admitted she didn't know whether the child was mine or David's, and since there was no way to prove it at the time, she decided to stay with me because she believed I was the more dependable brother. That was the reason we got married. It felt like my entire world was collapsing. The son I loved might not even be mine. I asked Karen if she had been seeing David recently, and she slowly nodded. She said they had always stayed in contact because their chemistry was undeniable. They would secretly meet in hotels while telling me they were working overtime. She admitted that half of her business trips had habitually been romantic trips with him. I asked her why she had married me if she wanted my brother. Karen said she didn't want to be the one who ended the marriage. She saw me as a wonderful father to our son and chose to stay. In her words, she made a mistake and didn't know how to stop. I told Karen I was glad she had finally told me the truth, but I was going to pack my things and leave. She began crying and begged for forgiveness. She seemed to expect me to scream at her, but instead I quietly started packing my clothes. Karen insisted that if I loved her, I should fight for our marriage and that mistakes happen in every relationship. When she realized I wasn't reacting the way she expected, she changed her approach. She said our son would suffer if we divorced and that children shouldn't grow up in broken homes. I reminded her that I might not even be his father. That made her cry harder and accused me of being cruel. It seemed as though she believed nothing could make me want to leave the marriage. Perhaps part of the blame was mine, for allowing things to slide in the past. While I did love her, it felt as though that love was tied to the belief that we had a son together, and had been a couple since college. Karen kept insisting that it wasn't too late to repair everything, but I struggled to believe her and had no patience left. Trust had become a major issue, and her words felt empty. Even if I forgave her, I could never forget that she had slept with my brother. I have always believed in forgiving mistakes, because we are all flawed, but this crossed a line that I could not accept. I left her crying at the doorstep and checked into a hotel. The next day I went straight to my parents' house and revealed everything about my wife's affair with David, explaining that they had been secretly sleeping together for years. The shock on their faces was undeniable. True to her nature, my mother initially tried to defend David, insisting that her son could never do something like that to his own brother. Determined to reveal the truth, I asked my parents to remain quiet while I called David in front of them. I told them to stay silent so I could catch him off guard and make him believe it was a private conversation. When David answered the phone, I confronted him about the affair. At first he strongly denied everything, refusing to accept any responsibility. But when I told him that Karen had already admitted the truth, he began blaming her, calling her characterless. He claimed it wasn't his fault if women were attracted to him, and said that he was the better-looking brother. I told him firmly that I would expose him to everyone. David mocked me, saying that no one would believe me, because he was the golden child. I scoffed at his arrogance and thanked him for confirming the truth. Knowing that our parents had heard everything, David suddenly went quiet, and then began stammering, trying to explain himself and salvage his image. My mother, still in shock, demanded an explanation from him. He struggled through a weak attempt to justify his behavior, blaming everyone else, and desperately trying to shift the blame onto Karen. I could see that my mother, who had always protected her favorite son, now looked disappointed and angry. In that tense moment, I felt a strange sense of vindication. For years I had endured David's cruelty. But now the truth was out, and the roles had reversed. It was David who stood exposed, his actions revealed for everyone to see. As David's excuses faltered, my father, usually calm and reserved, couldn't hide his disappointment. He asked me to hand him the phone and began speaking to David. "David, David, David," my father said, his voice heavy with disappointment. "What you've done is not only a betrayal of your brother, but also a betrayal of this entire family. You slept with your brother's wife, and continued the affair even after they were married. Your actions have serious consequences, and have permanently destroyed the trust we had in you. I raised both of you to value loyalty, respect and decency. What you've done goes against everything I tried to teach you." He paused for a moment, letting the weight of his words sink in. "Your complete disregard for your brother's feelings, and your lack of respect for his marriage are unacceptable. You haven't just hurt him. You've damaged the bonds that hold this family together. Your mother and I may share some responsibility for the person you've become. But we will not tolerate this behavior anymore. From today onward, you are cut off from the college funds I created for you. You'll have to find a way to pay for your own university fees. I will also stop supporting your lifestyle. Do you think sleeping with married women makes you more of a man? Let's see how well you manage without my money." Throughout the entire exchange I remained calm. Although I had initially wanted to scream at David, watching my father punish him felt like the ultimate vindication. I had revealed his true character, and it was obvious that he had underestimated the consequences. My mother, despite David's continued protests, still tried to defend him, but my father quickly ended the call, cutting off David's attempts to excuse his actions. Afterward, my mother walked over and hugged me. It had been a long time since we shared a moment like that. In that embrace there was an unspoken sense of understanding and support despite everything happening in our family. She apologized for never believing me before. My 14-year-old self could never have imagined, in this moment, being proven right and embraced by my mother. After that, my father helped me find a good lawyer so I could divorce Karen. She and her lawyer tried to play dirty by asking for alimony since I earned more than she did. But her affair worked heavily in my favor. We also conducted a paternity test, which confirmed that David was indeed the father of the child. The news was incredibly painful, far worse than discovering Karen's infidelity. I was furious that the son I had loved and raised was not actually mine. Still, I forced myself to stay strong. Karen begged me to continue visiting my son, arguing that he shouldn't be punished for the situation. But I couldn't bring myself to see him. He reminded me too much of David, and I hated that feeling. Once the divorce was finalized, I felt a sense of freedom as I moved into my own bachelor apartment. It felt strange living alone, because I had married so young and never truly experienced independence. Fortunately, my naturally independent personality helped me adjust quickly, and I found myself enjoying the new lifestyle. 2 weeks ago my dad called to tell me he was considering changing his will, because he didn't want to leave anything to David. My dad is extremely stubborn, and once he decided to cut David out of his life, he stayed firm. David tried contacting our parents, and even showed up at their house begging for forgiveness. But they refused to let him inside. Even my mother, who had always given in to David's tantrums, seemed finished with him, though it must have been especially difficult for her. David never once sent me a message apologizing for what he had done. It was clear he didn't regret his actions. He was only upset about being cut off by our parents. My father told me he planned to leave everything to me, to make sure David couldn't contest the inheritance later. He intended to leave Davy. He only $1. I was stunned. My dad had worked hard his entire life, and when you included his assets, retirement fund and life insurance, the total came to nearly $2 million. The only condition in his will was that if my father passed away before my mother, she would continue living in their house, even though ownership would transfer to me. I had no problem with that because I wanted to take care of my mom in her final years. Somehow David found out about this. Unable to reach our parents, he called me yesterday, trying to make peace. He explained that he was struggling in college and that after Karen discovered the paternity results, she had been demanding child support from him. He said he had no money and was trying to find part-time work, but hadn't had any luck. He begged me to speak to our parents, so we could all start over, saying he really needed my help. I laughed and told him I was done with him. I reminded him that he should have thought about the consequences before sleeping with my wife and getting her pregnant. David argued that I was being unfair and that Karen was also responsible. I agreed with that, but reminded him that I had divorced her, which meant she was now his responsibility. He shouldn't be calling me to complain about her or the child, because those were the consequences of his own decisions. David started raising his voice, but I cut him off and reminded him that he was no longer the family's golden child. Instead, he was the black sheep who had slept with his own brother's wife. At that point, David began crying. He told me that everyone, including our grandparents and other relatives, had turned against him. While that may have been true, it was no longer my concern. I told him we were finished, and that he should never call me again because I no longer considered him my brother. Since then, I've replayed that conversation in my head many times. Despite everything, I had never heard David cry before. Not since we were children. I won't lie. Seeing him so helpless did hurt a little. That's why I'm here asking whether I should talk to my parents about him, or if I would be wrong not to. Update 1. Many of you have been asking why I am no longer in contact with my son Henry, and some people have even called me cruel. I want to explain that I'm not comfortable raising another man's child. This isn't a step-parent situation. I was led to believe Henry was my son, only to discover later that he is actually my brother David's child. Naturally, this revelation hurt deeply, and I cried about it for days. The main reason I don't want any contact with Henry is because I don't want Karen back in my life. If I remain connected to her child, she will eventually find a way to re-enter my life, and I need my space. You may think I'm selfish or cruel, but I cannot see him again, at least not for a very long time. Update 2. Most of you correctly guessed that it was my mother who told David about my dad changing his will, which is why he called me as a last attempt to fix things. I confronted her about it in front of my father, and she broke down crying. She said that David had been punished enough, and had learned his lesson. My dad firmly told her that if she believed what David had done was forgivable, then he could no longer remain married to her because he would never forgive such a betrayal. That statement silenced my mother. My father made it clear that if she ever spoke to David again and we found out, she would have to pack her bags and leave. As I mentioned before, my dad is extremely stubborn. Hopefully my mother has learned from her mistake. Update 3. It has now been 5 months since my last update. My relationship with my parents has improved during this time. My dad and I go golfing every weekend, and he treats me more like a friend than a son. Although my mother still misses David, she has stayed away from him. The last news I heard about David came from my cousin. Apparently he had been asking relatives for money, and eventually had to drop out of college, because he couldn't afford the tuition. He and Karen are now living together, and he works part-time as a mechanic. From what I've been told, they are raising Henry together, which is probably for the best. I never talk about David with my parents, and they don't bring him up either. For those who have asked, I'm doing quite well. 2 months ago I received a promotion at work, so my salary has improved significantly. I haven't started dating anyone yet because I still feel like I need time and space to heal. I've also started going to therapy, so we'll see how that goes. Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more shocking real-life stories happening around you.